as we've sort of highlighted and touched on issues around the breastfeeding support that's available within the hospital or lacking within the hospital, it is like a real pleasure today to have Lola, who just asked the last question. Lola Ornato, she is a mother of 3 breastfed children and is also a midwife and has been for nearly 20 years. Her talk is Joyful Breastfeeding, My Experience as a Midwife and Mother. So Lola will be with us for the next half an hour. After that, I know the chat has been busy over here. On my right hand side here, we will be having the chance for group discussions. So we'll be breaking into groups. We've nearly got 50 people on the call today. We're all in good company. So we'll break into breakout groups where we'll have a chance to share our stories and discuss some of the things that have been raised already. So for now, we will pass to Lola. Before then, we'll have the chance to share ourselves. Thank you, Lola.
Thank you very much. Can everyone hear me? Okay, I'm going to attempt to share my screen. Okay, that one. And can everyone see that PowerPoint? Lovely. I'm a technophobe, so I'm always looking for reassurance. Oh gosh, have I done slideshow? Okay. All right, so first and foremost, I just want to say thank you to Ruth and Carmel for inviting me to speak at this event. And I also want to say thank you to Atlantic Rain and Suzette, because their passion just shone through and I just found their talks really, really amazing. So I am here today to talk to you about my experience as a breastfeeding mother and a midwife. So I've entitled my talk Joyful Breastfeeding, and I hope it won't be too boring. I'm just using the PowerPoint just to remind me of the topics that I want to cover. So it's not going to be like a lecture, it's just going to be like a little discussion from my point of view. So my aims today are to share my breastfeeding experiences with everyone, to help normalize breastfeeding, and to share some positive images of myself breastfeeding my children. So a little bit about me. I am a midwife. I am a wife to my husband Fulvio. I'm a mother to 3 children, and I like to consider myself a badass breastfeeder. I stole that actually from someone on Facebook who has a page, and she talks about breastfeeding and tries to create a lot of positivity and normality around breastfeeding. So from a cultural perspective, my views and experiences of breastfeeding are, so I was in a webinar yesterday and we were talking about culture and what that actually means. And for me personally, I find my culture is very sort of mixed. So I am Nigerian. I was born in the UK, and at the age of 6, my parents took me back to Nigeria, where I lived until I was 20. And then I came back to this country in 1996. So a lot of my formative years were in Nigeria. So when I think about my views and my experiences of breastfeeding, it was very normal to see a woman in the marketplace take her boob out and comfort her child with breastfeeding. And I always remember going to the marketplace with my mum, and you could be haggling over something. You know, we like to haggle, we like to get the best bargain. And the woman whose shop it might be would have a baby in her arms. And if that baby started crying, all the arguments and all the aggression and all the anger just melted away. And the first thing that somebody would say is, which means, please answer that child, please give the baby the breast. So for me, it was always a normal way of feeding a baby. And then I came into midwifery and I did my training at the University of Hertfordshire. And we used to talk about breastfeeding a lot because obviously it's part of your training. And I remember the first breastfeeding session that we got, the midwife that was running the session came in and she started talking about, you know, how many people have held a baby and how many people have seen a baby being breastfed. And I thought, this is really unusual. Like, surely everybody has seen a baby breastfed, because I was coming at it from my experience in Nigeria. And then I realized actually in this country, there are lots of people, lots of grown-ups who have been around babies who have not been breastfed, or maybe those babies have been breastfed but not in front of them. And there are lots of grown-ups who haven't held babies, where in Nigerian culture, you hold babies all the time. There's always a relative or a friend or an auntie or a mother or a sibling whose baby you get to hold. So I thought, wow, you know, for me, this was like quite a new thing. And then I started to really dig deep and think, what had I seen since I had been in the UK? And I thought, actually, what I've seen is the sexualization of breasts. I haven't seen them being used as a tool to feed in a baby. So again, leading on, before I go on to talking about how my experience was as a mother, as a midwife, again, in practice, and just thinking about what Atlantic Rain was saying about the support, the one thing that always sticks with me and that I try and explain to students that I work with or other midwives is that all of us as midwives, we are human and we all have our views, and sometimes those views are not helpful. I have worked with midwives who will say, what's the big deal? You know, I have a friend who actually said, I don't really understand what the big deal is about this breastfeeding. If women can't do it, we've got formula. It's not as if we live in the third world where we have dirty water and our babies are going to die from the formula. So you can imagine that kind of a midwife, if she's then faced with the prospect of supporting a woman with breastfeeding, she's not going to do it very well. I would say that during my midwifery training, the actual teaching that we got around breastfeeding support wasn't great. I was very lucky in that I worked with mentors who really believed in supporting women and were able to support women with breastfeeding. I also think that when I was training, we didn't necessarily discharge women as quickly as we do now. And I think even when women had normal births and they went home, the postnatal support that they got was a lot more than they're getting now. So for example, legally, a midwife, you know, on the NHS, you are allowed to see your women for up to 4 weeks after the birth, but usually women are discharged by about day 10. And within those 10 days of care, we're looking at maybe 1 to 2 physical visits. I think now in the pandemic, some of these consultations are actually done on the phone. So you're actually going in to see the mum and actually truly supporting her. And I remember going to see women, you know, at a month on because they were still having problems with feeding. So I think we were definitely a little bit more invested in women. And as a mother, my experiences of breastfeeding were very positive, I would say. I really would say that I engaged my primitive brain. So I take that sort of sentence from a French pediatrician called Michel Audin, who always talks about the fact that when we're thinking about labor and birth, it's not your logical brain that you need to engage. You need to be able to be in tune with your body. So I think when I went into feeding my children, I honestly didn't really overthink anything. It didn't occur to me that I wouldn't be able to breastfeed them. I just thought, I'll put them on the breast and they will feed. So I didn't really anticipate any problems. I didn't buy any formula. I didn't buy any bottles. And my first daughter actually came at 36 weeks. I mean, it was 36 weeks by the scan, but according to me, I felt I was 38 weeks. However, when she was born, she was 2.2 kilos. So I thought, I'm not going to argue the toss, because if I say, no, she's 38 weeks, she is what would be considered a full-term baby, then it would be a case of like, well, she's a very tiny baby, because at 2.2 kilos, I think that worked out to be 4 pounds, 15 ounces. But I'm very petite. My husband is tall, but he's very slim. So I knew that from a genetic point of view, we were not going to have like a great big baby. But because she was 36 weeks and because she was 2.2 kilos, the protocol at the hospital was to do blood sugars on her. So to test her blood sugars to see that they were okay after she had fed. So when I gave birth, I had what is known as a 3rd-degree tear, which, you know, ironically, with a baby that small, you wouldn't think that I would have that kind of damage. So I had to go to theatre to be sutured. So I knew from a practical point of view that I wanted her to feed as soon as possible. And she went straight on and she latched on. I didn't have any problems whatsoever. So she fed for about an hour before we went into theatre. And then they did the blood sugar test, which was fine. And so the protocol was to do 3 of these tests after each feed. And if those 3 tests were fine, then she'd be okay. So I gave birth at about 3 o'clock in the afternoon and I stayed overnight. And the midwives on shift knew that I was a midwife. I didn't give birth at the hospital that I worked at. They knew I was a midwife, so I think they kind of left me to it. However, in the morning when the next midwife came on, the first thing she said to me was, do you want us to give her a little bit of formula, you know, just to top her up? And I was thinking, where is this coming from? Like, so I said to her, can you explain what the reasons are? And she said, well, you know, she's really small. I said, okay, she's small, but she's in proportion. She doesn't look like her growth has been restricted. And actually, her blood sugars have been fine. So I would like you to explain to me why you think she needs to have formula based on everything we've just discussed just now. And she's like, well, I just think she's small. I said, well, she's small, but she's like her mum. She's petite, you know, she doesn't look like she's suffering. And when I reflected on it, I thought, my goodness, you know, I knew that my body was very capable of feeding my baby, and it had been. But I thought, if somebody else was presented with that information, it would be very easy for them to cave and say, well, the midwife said I should do it, so therefore I am going to do it because, you know, I don't want my baby to lose weight. The other thing that I noticed as a mother, for me personally, I didn't feel that I needed support with the act of breastfeeding. But I think sometimes when you're supporting a breastfeeding mother, it isn't just about supporting them with the act of breastfeeding, it's supporting them as a mother as a whole. So my Nigerian side knew that I'd had a baby, so they're bringing me jollof rice and they're bringing me all the soups and stews. My English friends, however, were being very sort of like, oh, we're not going to ring her because she's probably, you know, when's the best time to ring a mother? And I will say that for me personally, and I always say this to my friends, don't shut yourself off from the world. You need friends around you that are going to support you and nurture you to be a mother, because there were times where I would just lie in the bed and feed all day, and I would barely make it to the bathroom to brush my teeth or be able to go to the toilet. So the one thing that I wanted was for people to ring me and check up on me and make sure that I was okay. So I've always tried to instill this in all my other friends when they've had babies. I know you don't want people in and out of your house and you don't want all the rowdiness and everything, but you know that your friends are going to be there for you. They want to nurture you as a mother, and you need them sometimes to come and feed you. And actually, I have also educated my English friends that, you know, when you go and see a mum, it's really nice with the flowers that you're bringing, but they're not going to eat the flowers. You need to bring them food. That is the best thing that you can give a new mum, is to give her food. So my daughter, I breastfed until she was 5. And by that point, I had had another baby. So when my daughter was 2.5, I had my second child, a boy, and I had him at home. My one thing, I mean, I had planned home births with all my children, but my one thing was I wanted to get past 37 weeks so they wouldn't say you've got to come into the hospital. So I was kind of anxious until I got past the 37-week mark. And then he came sort of a day before he was 40 weeks. And again, breastfeeding was quite easy. The difference between my daughter and my son, I would say, is that for the first few days, my nipples were quite sore with my daughter, to the point that I think on day 5, it was that sort of curl your toes when she latched on. But then after the first sort of week, it got better. With my son, there wasn't really any discomfort at all. So it was quite an easy transition. And I tandem fed them a lot. So I would feed, you know, my daughter was still feeding quite a lot at 2.5. And also there was that sort of sibling jealousy. So a lot of the times I'd put them on my breast together. And then we got to, so my son was 2.5 and my daughter was 5. And actually, funny enough, what I thought was really interesting was the letdown reflex. So, you know, you have oxytocin that flows in your body and it helps you to let down your milk. And I just was going to touch on what Atlantic Rain said about fretful breastfeeding. So if you're stressed or upset, sometimes you don't let down. And this is something that I always talk to women when they have their babies, because I think a lot of women think they're going to have this beautiful birth and then the baby's just going to go on the breast straight away. And that may happen, but if it doesn't happen, it's okay. If the baby is fine and you're okay, sometimes it's just about settling in and having a little cuddle and having some time on your own with the baby and waiting until you're seeing those cues from the baby to put the baby on. So what I found with my son was, when he, you know, when he was 2.5 and my daughter was 5, he was still quite innocent. A lot of the things that he was doing them and he didn't know, you know, if you got upset with him, he wasn't sort of planning to really annoy you. So I would put him on my breast and I would let down and it would be beautiful and it would be fine. With my daughter, she'd got to the point where she was 5. She was pushing my buttons a little bit. She was still quite jealous of her brother. So I found that sometimes when I put her on the breast, she'd have to suck quite a few times in order for me to let down, because I'd be upset with her because she'd done something really naughty. And then she'd come and feed and I'd be sort of like, oh, for goodness sake. And it would take quite a while for the milk to come through. So that was something that I didn't know could happen. And then at the age of 5, I thought, I wanted to stop feeding her. So I sat her down and I had a conversation. I think the beauty of feeding an older child actually is that you can have a conversation with them. And it's quite interesting to hear what they have to say about their experience of breastfeeding as well. So I know, in some communities, people say like, oh gosh, once that baby gets teeth, it just becomes very weird. Or once the baby can speak, or once the child can speak, they shouldn't be breastfeeding. But I actually embrace that. I like the fact that I can have a conversation with my children about feeding. So I just said to her, I said, Morella, you know what? I think you're 5 and you've had lots of milk from mummy. I think it's time you stopped. I don't know how I would have dealt with it if she'd said no, but actually she went, okay. And that was kind of it. So we stopped our breastfeeding journey at 5. And then I continued with my son until he was 4. And with my son, it was a little bit more intense because I felt that my daughter was on me all the time breastfeeding until I had my son. And what I found with my daughter was probably from the age of about 2.5, I would feed her to go to sleep, put her down for the night. And even when she woke up, she wasn't really that bothered whether she got milk or not. But my son, when he woke up during the night, he cried, he wanted mummy. If I wasn't on a night shift, he was in the bed breastfeeding with me. And I was really tired. I felt like almost every day I was waking up and it felt as if I had done a night shift. So I was really tired and I got to about 4 and I thought, I'm just exhausted. So I tried to wean him. We had a little conversation. He told me in no uncertain terms that he does not negotiate with terrorists. So we carried on. And then eventually we came to a natural end because my milk supply actually stopped. And that was just probably about 4 and a couple of months after he turned 4. So it was already dwindling, the milk supply. And then one morning I woke up and there was literally nothing there. And I said to him, I said, there's nothing there. He still wanted to have a go. So I let him have a little bit of a suckle for the next couple of days. And then he accepted there was no milk. And that was fine. And we thought we'd completed our family, but I stopped breastfeeding. I started ovulating and I got pregnant with number 3. So my 3rd baby is currently feeding now. He's 5 years old. I try not to use the word still breastfeeding because I think when I say that, it implies that it's wrong for a baby to breastfeed at, or a child to breastfeed at that age. So I always say to people, he's currently breastfeeding. The other experiences that I had as a mum was breastfeeding older children in public. So when I fed in public, I really didn't have I wasn't worried about it. So I always used to make sure that I wore sort of one up, one down. So I would have a vest underneath my top so I could pull one up and pull one down. And that was mainly because I didn't like exposing my tummy more than anything else. So that worked really well for me. I would say I normally would get positivity. I think when I was breastfeeding the older children, sometimes I'd get a little bit of a double take, like, oh, she's breastfeeding that child. But I never really got any negativity. So the support I received, I sort of mentioned that earlier about family just being around to nurture me as a mother. So people bring in food. I had one particular friend who had a day off. Her days off were on Friday. So she would come with her daughter and they would sit with my older daughter and play with my older daughter. And at the time, I didn't really think anything of it, but when I reflect now, I think actually that was really, really supportive. And I actually ended up paying that forward to another friend. And I would go and sit with her whenever I could. And sometimes I would say, do you want to go out for a walk? And we'd go out for a walk. And years later, she said to me, I know that we never really spoke about breastfeeding and it looked like I was okay, but you being there was what made me carry on breastfeeding my child until 2. And actually the only reason she stopped feeding her child at 2 was they wanted to have another baby, and because she was breastfeeding so much she wasn't ovulating, so she weaned her child so she can conceive another baby. But she said, I'll never forget it. And leading on from friends and family as well, what I think is really interesting, especially with Black and brown women, is that there is an assumption that our families know what to do, that our families have fed for years, and therefore they pass on this information and we don't need the support. And I would say categorically that's not always true. My mum's experiences of breastfeeding are, there's three of us, I'm the youngest and I have two older brothers. So her experiences of breastfeeding are, she breastfed my brothers in Nigeria. With her first child, with my oldest brother, she breastfed for 6 months. With my my second oldest brother, she breastfed for a year. And then they moved to the UK and she gave birth to me, and she breastfed me for 3 months and supplemented because she was encouraged to do so. And she was led to believe that she didn't have enough milk. So if you look at my mum's experience and rely on her experience and think, oh, Lola's mum will be fine supporting her breastfeeding, my mum probably wouldn't know how to support me with breastfeeding. And my other friend, who also has Nigerian heritage, said exactly the same thing. And in fact, when she was pregnant, she had seen me breastfeed my babies. So she did the same thing as I did. She decided, I'm not going to get formula, I'm not going to get bottles, because I feel that will already put in my mind that I cannot nurture my babies. But her mum was a nurse, and her mum had been told the same thing: you haven't got enough milk, you have to supplement. So her mum was really worried that she was setting herself up to fail by not having the formula. And then when she realized that her daughter had enough milk and breastfed her babies beautifully, she said, you know what, I wish I had the support that you had, because I was actually taught the wrong thing. And if it had been left to me to nurture you in your breastfeeding journey, I would have taught you the wrong thing, that actually you don't have enough milk and you need to supplement. So I think making stereotypes or generalizing about Black or brown families, it is quite wrong, because we all have different upbringings, we all have different cultures. Our parents fed us, different ways, and they might not have breastfed and they might have breastfed. So it's very difficult to say, oh, because you come from this culture, breastfeeding is going to be very easy for you. That's not always the case. Breastfeeding groups, I would say that I didn't really need any breastfeeding support. However, I did go to a breastfeeding cafe once. And the reason I went was, when I got to about 6 months, I started to think about what I would do if and when I had to go back to work. So I knew I was going to go back to work roughly around the 9-month mark. And I was really worried because I couldn't express. And I was listening to Suzette talking about her difficulty with expressing. And it was the same for me. My boobs the first time around were really full. I was leaking everywhere. It was spurting out everywhere, but I couldn't express. And I think it was the anxiety actually of thinking, I've got to go to work. How much do you express? I've never had to measure what I'm giving to the baby. How much is she taking? How much am I going to put in the bottle? So I had a hard time expressing. And I went to a breastfeeding cafe, and it was all new mums. And I went in with my 6-month-old baby. And the first thing that the midwife said was, oh, you don't need any help, when she saw the baby latching on. And I said, actually, I do. I've come here to get some advice on expressing, because I can't express any milk. I'm thinking of going back to work in a few months and I'm really stressed out. And she didn't actually have any advice for me. And I think the very first day that I left my daughter at home to go to work, I had managed to pump probably about 300 mils. It was like in a bottle, maybe even less actually. And thankfully she was eating solid. So I said to my husband, look, I'm going for a 12-hour shift. If you have to put her in the sling and bring her and breastfeed her at work, that's how it's going to be. But just give her her food and give her the milk and see if she'll take it. And I'll feed her when I get home, because at 9 months, I knew that she could have her solids and some water. And for that one shift, she'd be okay. And as it happened, she absolutely refused the bottle. And she never did. She never, ever took the breast milk unless it was from my boobs directly. So what I would do is I would pump a little bit for my husband to give her in her porridge. And then we would just wait until I got home for her to feed. So I found that for me, breastfeeding groups, it would be nice if there was something where they could support people with breastfeeding older children, because sometimes problems do actually materialize from that as well. So what can you do to make your breastfeeding journey easier? So learn about breastfeeding, learn about how the body works. I'm always talking to my students when they want to support a woman with breastfeeding, like, you need to understand the mechanics of breastfeeding. If you're standing over a woman and you want to grab her boob and shove the boob into the baby's mouth, think about what she needs to do to produce milk and to let down. First of all, she needs to gain confidence that she can feed her own baby, and you grabbing her and the baby is not going to give her any confidence at all, because what you're inadvertently telling her is that she can't do it without your help. She needs to be in a loving environment. She needs to let the oxytocin flow. We need to leave them and give them the buzzer and say, call us if you need some help, or if you want us to stay here and watch you breastfeed or give you some tips about breastfeeding, then you need to let us know what to do. Surround yourself with positive, supportive people and images. So an example of being supported breastfeeding an older child is something that happened to me when I was at playgroup with my middle one. So when he was about 3, we used to go to the local playgroup, and obviously there were babies of different ages. So there were lots of mums who had newborn babies who would come for just coffee and a chat, really, more than anything else. And one day my son was running around, and, you know, I would say out of everybody in the playgroup, he was probably the oldest child breastfeeding. So there was a group of babies that were feeding and maybe a 1-year-old, but my son at 3 was the oldest one that was breastfeeding in public anyway. So about an hour into this particular day that we had gone, my friend came up to me and said, "Can you believe the cheek?" And I said, "What's happened?" And she said, "Oh, I was just talking to this woman," and she went, "I just have to ask you, is your friend still breastfeeding?" So my friend's quite quick-witted, so she didn't even entertain it. She just said, "What friend are you talking about? I've got loads of friends here." So having been confronted with that, she couldn't then say, "Well, actually, I'm talking about Lola," because that would then mean she would have to say, she had an issue with me breastfeeding an older child. So even those kind of things where your friends have your back and actually are going to say, "There's nothing wrong with you feeding this baby, you need to leave her alone." And I always surrounded myself with positive images when I was pregnant and breastfeeding, because it gives me joy. And I think having that joy again is what's kept my milk supply going for so long. And believe in yourself, believe that you can do it, believe that your breasts are there to nurture your babies if that's what you choose to do. And I always say to people who come up with, "Oh, that woman hasn't got enough milk," I always send it back to them and say, well, how many people do you know that truly don't have enough milk? Because actually it's very rare not to produce enough milk for your baby. What is very common is to get in the way of the mechanisms of breastfeeding and then justify that and say, "Oh, that woman didn't have enough milk." And finally, some images of me breastfeeding. So that was after baby number 3. You can't really see him there. And that's me feeding number 1 and number 2. That's me feeding number 1, my daughter. And that's another one of me feeding Mirella when I think she was about 2 in that picture. And that's my middle one, Giacomo, when he was about 2. And I just wanted to end this as well by saying that I was speaking to my 5-year-old today and telling him that I was going to be doing this talk. And I thought, actually, you tell me, what do you get out of breastfeeding? And so he'd like you all to know that breastfeeding keeps him warm and it keeps him not thirsty. So thank you very much. If anybody's got any questions, I'm happy to take them now.
Thank you so much, Lola, for all that you shared. What a wonderful talk. It's so enriching and touched on so many aspects of feeding journeys that need to be highlighted and looked at, from support to families, from the sitting with that we can do with one another. Tandem feeding. I've been writing notes down here, written also meal times, not just meal times for baby, but the jollof rice as well. So important. So yes, we've invited questions. There's been some comments around expressing and where people can get support. But I wondered if anybody had questions for Lola just before we move on with the group discussion.
Hi, Rosie, it's Naomi.
Hey, Naomi.
I was just wanting to ask Lola, my experience of working as a breastfeeding support worker on a postnatal ward, and in my ignorance and naivety, not noticing a difference in the way different ethnicities were treated in regard to breastfeeding support. Until the day when a midwife said, "Oh, can you go to the lady in bed 13?" And I was like, yep, no problem. Any information you want to give me? And she said, no, I'm just a bit confused. She's asked to see you, but normally they just get on with it. And I didn't really hear. I just kind of, okay. And I went to the bedside, and when I came to the bedside and it was an Afro-Caribbean lady, I suddenly realized, oh, she's just assumed that this mother will just get on with it because of the color of her skin, without any concept of an individual and her need for support. And I was just wondering if, I mean, that was about 4 or 5 years ago, if there is, Lola has experience of a change or an awareness or a shift, or if that's still endemic in practice in midwifery, about like she mentioned, the whole kind of the cultural heritage of breastfeeding in Nigeria, and then the impact that was had on practices in the UK, obviously, you know, several decades ago, but yeah.
I think there is a little bit of a change. I would say that where I'm working at the moment, the infant feeding midwives are very aware of these generalizations and that they are harmful. And so they are trying to incorporate that where I work. I can't speak for everywhere. They're trying to incorporate that. Ironically, I was speaking to a friend of mine who is a psychiatrist and is currently working in perinatal mental health. And he said, you know, all the Black women that I see, their frustration is the assumption that they come from these families who can tell them everything. But you know what I say to my colleagues is, so what if they do? They still deserve the same information that you are going to give to the white woman sitting next to them. It doesn't matter what help they're getting from their families. You don't know. I mean, for my family, for example, my mom is, her family were fairly wealthy. They're very well educated. I would say she was a middle-class Nigerian, I suppose. My dad came from a polygamous home. He is very well educated, but his family, you know, it was a case of the boys went to school and the women didn't. My mom's views on breastfeeding is it's fine, but when she saw me breastfeeding my 2-year-old when I was during a Skype call a few years ago, her comment was, oh, you're going to be like those market women then with their boobs hanging out. My dad's comment was, he's 2, he's still got at least another 3 years before he weans, because my dad grew up in a little town where his school teacher would bring the baby and breastfeed the baby while she was teaching, because she had no one to look after the baby, but also the baby needs to breastfeed. So if you're trying to say that my mum is going to give me support with breastfeeding, actually, I'd probably be more likely to get it from my dad. So it doesn't really matter. I think there's a big issue with not giving Black and brown women the same care that we give white women overall, regardless of what kind of support they've got. I mean, what are we saying? Are we saying that Black and brown women have loads of support and white women don't? You know, so what we should really be embracing is that we need to give the same information to everybody. And I have actually said to my colleagues, you can be honest and say that when you go and see someone who's Black or brown, you don't know where to start. I'd rather you said that than assume or justify you not going into that room or to bed 13 because you think she's got it sorted. Because some of it is also about the you know, being uncomfortable, maybe not having dealt with those kind of people before, or someone from that kind of culture before. And it's about the midwife really, and it isn't about that woman at all. So that would be what I would say. I don't know if that's answered your question. I think I just rambled a lot.
Nice insight. It's just interesting that from my experience, and obviously we can only reflect on apart from studies, but it you know, if it was a Southeast Asian mother, if it was someone from Asia, if it was someone from South America or North America, there wouldn't be that assumption.
Yeah.
Whereas if it was someone with Black skin from an Afro-Caribbean heritage, then the chances were that assumption would be made. And sometimes, you know, because of my age, in my mid-40s, sometimes I think it's those images of Ethiopia during the famine, of women with babies at the breast that sat in the subconscious that mean that we have this assumption. But yeah, it's just interesting.
That's exactly it. And what I would very quickly say, I know we've sort of slightly gone over time, but I just wanted to very quickly say as well that people should also remember that you know, our mothers and our grandmothers and whatnot may have also learnt the wrong things that they are passing down, which is why you need to educate everybody. Because, you know, there's a big thing with, when I trained, I worked in an area where there was a big South Asian population, and I was always told, oh, they always bottle feed their babies for the first few days because they don't believe they have milk. Yes, but have you gone in and told them they do have colostrum? So you know, it's those sort of things, thinking that actually we don't always get it right, and we need the education just as much as the next person.
Thank you so much, Lola. Powerful testimony, powerful sharing, powerful answers. I'm really glad to see that all of these sessions, they're recorded and they will be available in the Mighty Networks group for the coming days, so we can go over and just be taking in what we're hearing. And for those of us who are practitioners, we can be learning and implementing and changing how we do things, and sharing and standing up when we see these things that Naomi shared going on, so they don't continue, and be safe.